In the late 1800s, the Blackwood family, consisting of Mr. Jonathan Blackwood, his wife Eleanor, and their 2 children, moved into an opulent manor in the English countryside. The house was a grand, sprawling estate, rich with history and filled with antique furniture and intricate tapestries. Despite its beauty, the manor had a dark past. Local villagers whispered that it was haunted by the ghost of a servant girl named Margaret, who was brutally murdered by the jealous wife of the manor's original owner. Upon moving in, the Blackwood family was enamored by the manor's grandeur. The children, Emily and Thomas, spent their days exploring the expansive gardens and hidden passageways within the house. However, it wasn't long before strange occurrences began to disrupt their idyllic life. Eleanor was the first to notice. She often felt a sudden chill in the air, even when the fireplaces were roaring. She would find doors open that she was sure she had closed, and hear faint, sorrowful sobs echoing through the halls at night. One evening, as she was reading in the library, she glimpsed a pale figure out of the corner of her eye. When she turned to look, there was nothing there, but the feeling of being watched persisted. The children, too, began to experience unsettling events. Emily would wake up in the middle of the night, feeling as though someone was gently brushing her hair. Thomas, who had a playful spirit, often heard whispers and giggles when he played hide and seek, but could never find the source. One day, he stumbled upon an old, dusty diary hidden in the attic. It belonged to Margaret, the servant girl, and detailed her tragic love affair with the manor's original owner and the cruel jealousy of his wife. Jonathan, a pragmatic man, initially dismissed his family's concerns as mere imagination. However, his skepticism waned one night when he was working late in his study. The room grew inexplicably cold, and the lights flickered before going out entirely. In the dim glow of the fireplace, Jonathan saw a young woman with hollow eyes and a blood-stained dress standing at his desk. She whispered, "Help me," before vanishing into the darkness. Determined to uncover the truth, Jonathan began researching the manor's history. He discovered that Margaret's murder had been covered up to protect the family's reputation. Her restless spirit, seeking justice and peace, was trapped within the manor. The Blackwood family decided they needed to help her find closure. They reached out to a local medium, Mrs. Hawthorne, who agreed to conduct a séance. On a stormy night, the family and Mrs. Hawthorne gathered in the drawing room. As the medium began to chant, the temperature in the room plummeted, and the flickering candle flames cast eerie shadows on the walls. Suddenly, the room was filled with a cold, mournful wind, and the figure of Margaret appeared before them. Through Mrs. Hawthorne, Margaret recounted her story, revealing the location of her hidden remains. She pleaded for a proper burial so she could finally rest in peace. Moved by her tale, the Blackwoods followed her instructions and found her bones buried beneath an old oak tree in the garden. They arranged for a proper burial in the village cemetery, and a memorial service was held to honor Margaret's memory. As they laid her to rest, a palpable sense of relief washed over the manor. The haunting presence that had plagued the family dissipated, replaced by a serene tranquility. The Blackwood Manor, once shrouded in sorrow and fear, became a place of peace and reflection. The Blackwood family, forever changed by their encounter with Margaret, lived out their days with a deeper appreciation for the unseen connections between the living and the departed. The tale of the haunting of Blackwood Manor became a legend in the village, a story of justice, redemption, and the enduring power of compassion. In the bustling city of Boston, Sarah, a young professional, had just moved into a new apartment after securing a job at a prominent marketing firm. Excited about her fresh start, she looked forward to meeting her new roommate, Emily, who had advertised the spare room online. The apartment was modern and well decorated, with a cozy living room and a sleek kitchen. Emily, a quiet woman with pale skin and an enigmatic aura, greeted Sarah warmly but spoke very little. From the beginning, Sarah noticed something unusual about Emily. She moved with an almost unnatural grace and never made a sound when she walked. Despite her quiet demeanor, Emily was kind and helpful, and the two settled into a comfortable routine. However, as days turned into weeks, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. One night, as Sarah was heading to bed, she heard a faint noise coming from the living room. Curious, she tiptoed out of her bedroom and peered into the dimly lit room. There, she saw Emily, sitting silently in the dark, staring straight ahead. Sarah's heart pounded as she asked if everything was all right, but Emily just smiled faintly without saying a word. Over time, Sarah began to notice more strange behaviors. Emily never seemed to eat, sleep, or leave the apartment. She would often find Emily sitting in odd places, like the bathroom or the hallway, completely still and silent. One evening, Sarah heard whispering coming from Emily's room. When she knocked and entered, the room was empty, but the whispering continued, echoing softly around her. Determined to uncover the truth, Sarah decided to investigate. She searched through Emily's belongings while she was out one afternoon. In a drawer, she found an old newspaper clipping, an obituary for a girl named Emily who had died in a car accident 2 years ago. The photo in the obituary was identical to her roommate. Sarah's blood ran cold as she realized she had been living with a ghost. Panicked, Sarah confronted Emily that night. Emily stood in the hallway, her face expressionless. "Who are you?" Sarah demanded, her voice trembling. Emily's eyes filled with sadness as she whispered, "I'm sorry." Before Sarah could say another word, Emily vanished before her eyes, leaving only a cold, empty silence behind. Terrified and unable to stay another night, Sarah packed her belongings in a frenzy. As she hurriedly stuffed her clothes into suitcases, she kept glancing over her shoulder, half expecting to see Emily's ghostly figure reappear. By morning, Sarah had moved out, leaving the apartment and its haunting memories behind. Standing outside the building with her luggage, Sarah looked back at the apartment one last time. It seemed ordinary, almost welcoming, but she knew better. The experience had left her shaken, but also filled with a strange sense of compassion for the silent, sorrowful spirit she had briefly known. The story of her eerie encounter would stay with her forever, a chilling reminder of the thin veil between the living and the dead. As a child, Jake often woke in the middle of the night to see a tall, shadowy figure standing in the corner of his bedroom. The figure never moved or spoke, but its presence filled him with an inexplicable dread. Jake's parents dismissed his fears as nothing more than an overactive imagination. Over time, he learned to live with the nightly visits, though he never felt entirely comfortable in his own room. Years later, Jake moved away from his childhood home to start a new life in a bustling city. He quickly settled into his new apartment and enjoyed the independence of adulthood. The memories of the Shadow Man faded into the background, overshadowed by the demands of his busy life. One night, after a long day at work, Jake decided to visit his parents for the weekend. It was the first time he had returned home in years. As he walked through the familiar halls of his childhood home, a wave of nostalgia washed over him. His parents welcomed him warmly, and they spent the evening reminiscing about the past. When bedtime came, Jake felt a strange unease. He had no choice but to sleep in his old bedroom. the room that had once been haunted by the Shadow Man. The room was exactly as he remembered it, down to the smallest detail. He climbed into bed, trying to shake off the growing sense of anxiety. In the middle of the night, Jake awoke with a start. The room was pitch black, and a cold sweat covered his body. He slowly turned his head towards the corner, and his heart skipped a beat. The Shadow Man was there, just as he had been all those years ago. The figure stood silently, its dark form blending into the shadows. Jake's fear was paralyzing. He tried to convince himself it was just a nightmare, a figment of his imagination. But the figure remained, watching him with unseen eyes. Gathering his courage, Jake decided to confront his childhood terror. He took a deep breath and whispered, "Who are you?" To his surprise, the Shadow Man slowly turned and pointed towards the bedroom door. Jake followed the direction of the outstretched arm, his curiosity overcoming his fear. He got out of bed and cautiously approached the door. The hallway beyond was dark and silent. As he stepped into the hallway, he felt a sudden rush of cold air. The figure of the Shadow Man appeared at the far end, beckoning him to follow. Jake, driven by a mix of fear and determination, walked towards the apparition. It led him to the basement door, a place he had rarely ventured as a child. With trembling hands, Jake opened the door and descended the creaky stairs. The basement was dimly lit by a single, flickering light bulb. In the corner of the room, he saw a small, dusty chest. The Shadow Man stood beside it, pointing once again. Jake approached the chest, feeling a strange compulsion to open it. Inside, he found old family photographs, letters, and a worn-out journal. As he flipped through the pages of the journal, he discovered that it belonged to his great-grandfather, a man who had lived in the house many years before. The journal detailed a tragic story of loss and betrayal. Jake's great-grandfather had been wrongly accused of a crime and had taken his own life in the basement, unable to bear the shame. His restless spirit had lingered in the house, manifesting as the Shadow Man in Jake's bedroom. Tears filled Jake's eyes as he read the final entry. His great-grandfather had written, "I hope one day someone will understand my pain and set me free." Overwhelmed with compassion, Jake realized that the Shadow Man had been seeking recognition and closure. He gathered the journal and the photographs and took them upstairs. The next morning, he shared the story with his parents. Together, they decided to hold a small ceremony to honor their ancestor and lay his spirit to rest. They buried the journal and photographs in the garden, offering prayers for peace and forgiveness. From that day on, the Shadow Man never appeared again. The house felt lighter, free from the weight of the past. Jake returned to his city life, but he carried with him a newfound understanding of the unseen connections that bind families together. The story of the Shadow Man became a part of his family's history, a tale of redemption and the enduring power of compassion.